Very often when building a new relationship, we're given a lot of tools in order to endear ourselves. We're taught to be of service, to be very agreeable, to seek for a lot of cohesion. However, over the years, I've found it to be more of a priority to very quickly begin to judge whether or not that person is emotionally stable. And there's a little exercise that I use that helps me to determine very, very, very quickly whether or not somebody is potentially emotionally unstable or dysregulated. And it is a ridiculously simple word.
No.
For tension with
No.
No. No. No.
No.
Simply saying the word no, turning someone down, or disappointing them in some way. I love to disappoint a new acquaintance. I love it because it tells me so much of what I need to know about that person that very often you don't get to see until years into a relationship. This is a kind of a test that over the years has saved me from a lot of toxic relationships, really stressful work situations. I've learned when to back away from maybe a potential client or something like that. Let me explain to you how I use this. But first I want to talk about why I think this is actually important. People are really great when things are going well. When everything is going your way, it's easy to keep up a certain appearance and to be pleasant and to sort of maintain social graces and charisma and that kind of thing. But when life happens and inevitably something doesn't go your way, or you are disappointed for some reason, or for whatever reason you don't get what you want, that's often when the darkest parts of someone can come out. And I found that it's really, really useful to get a peek into what that is early on, because it allows me to make up my mind as to whether or not I want to continue having a relationship with this person, or if I continue having a relationship, where to place this relationship and what to expect and how to deal with this person going forward. So I'll tell you how I first started to realize this and think about this. I'd say most of my life I've been a people pleaser. I was brought up that way, and I also grew up in a culture that expects a lot of compliance and cohesion, and especially out of children. And that was also just the generation as well. So in my early adulthood, I developed a skill for cohesion. Very friendly, very engaging, very, very chill, very easygoing. However, eventually as I got older, life just starts to do what life does. And when I found myself in genuine situations in life where I had no choice but to say no to someone because I maybe couldn't afford it or didn't have the time or whatever reason, I discovered something that was to me absolutely shocking. There are people who have violent reactions to being told no, or not getting what they want, or being disappointed. And okay, violent is a strong word, but if you look at it in the poetic sense, it is kind of like a shocking, jolting, violent reaction. There are people, for instance, who react to being told no with outrage, utter indignation. There's some people who literally put their hands on their hips. They go, there's some people who get shocked. There's people who react to being told no by punishment. They go, oh, you're not going to do it? Okay. Well, here's what's going to happen. And by the way, this is compulsive behavior. This is stuff that if you observe these people, and I'm sure as I'm saying this now, you can think of people like this. If you observe them, it's almost like they don't realize what they're doing. And you could even test this. I have learned consciously to do this decisively. I specifically, intentionally look for situations in a new connection that I'm building for when I'm going to tell this person no. It might not be enough to make an entire judgment of a person, but it starts me looking in a certain direction to go, I wonder if this is something that they have a general problem with, and I'll begin to now pay attention to how that person responds to when they don't get what they want or when something doesn't go according to their expectations. Of course, in my natural curiosity, I started to wonder if there is some kind of psychological explanation for this, and I realized that there are studies that point to this. There's one study, for instance, that talks about the first interactions between toddlers, and then they compare those first interactions to their prolonged or later interaction with each other, the quality of those interactions. And they realize that toddlers who have a positive interaction in their first meeting of each other are more likely to have a positive, prolonged experience of each other over time versus the opposite. Essentially, how things start out are typically how they continue to go. There's another study that goes even deeper than this, where this is done by Stanford University. I'll put the link to these in the description. This one looks at how parents engage with or indulge children. For instance, parents who observe their children while playing. If a child maybe breaks something or maybe they stumble over something, if that parent sort of rushes in and sort of interrupts that child's processing of the situation and immediately sort of coddles them or immediately reacts to whatever is going on, it has an impact on that child's ability to emotionally regulate over time. Another example is parents who, when telling their children no, they observe that when telling their children no and explaining, for instance, why you can't have that ice cream at 6 in the morning or whatever, actually, this same study has actually suggests that this is actually healthy for a child because it conditions you to essentially what life will offer. That, hey, sometimes in life, things don't go your way. And that's okay. You kind of have to deal with it. So when reading that, I realized, I swear, I think I've met people like this who might have been denied this opportunity to emotionally regulate as children. I'll give you a couple of examples. Like once I had a boss. Oh, she was classic. Oh, she was a classic. She used to glare red when met with something that didn't go her way, or when you said no, or when something was outside of her expectations. Like if she wanted you to stay late for something and you couldn't, maybe you had a prior engagement, it was how could you like when I realized it, I started to test this out. So if maybe she asked me to do something by a certain time, or like do something by this afternoon, I would say, I don't think I could do that by this afternoon. Maybe tomorrow is probably more likely. Like another example is, I used to have a friend who, he was a punisher. So when something didn't go his way, maybe he needed someone to pick him up, or he tried to call to get something and I didn't see the call, or whatever it is, his reaction to not getting what he want would be to sort of punish, go, oh, well, you didn't do this, so I'm not going to do that. And I would see him even do it with other people. Like, if he asked someone for something and they didn't have it, or weren't able to do like a favor for him or something, he would stop talking to them for a couple of days just because. And it wasn't even that he was like genuinely, I mean, maybe he was on some level disappointed, but he wouldn't be permanently obsessed about it. It was just almost like a compulsive thing that he had to do that because he didn't get something that he wanted. He would have to stop talking to you for a couple of days. That's just what, I'm not talking to you because we're here. And it was like an automatic kind of thing. And I'm sure you can imagine how in the early stages of meeting that person, like me with that boss, for instance, if, for instance, in the interview, I had thought to go, something, let me throw in some boundary setting early here. Let me throw in a little soft thing, just a quick thing here, that gives me information about how this person reacts when being told no. Like if they ask me to email them something, and I said, okay, I could do that, but not by this afternoon, maybe by tomorrow I can do that. Something as simple as that. That might have given me an early indication of of what type of a boss that person would be, seeing how they would react to that. So imagine maybe you're thinking, isn't this potentially reckless? Because, I mean, couldn't you kind of do some damage by telling someone no? You might risk offending somebody or losing out on opportunity, or I don't know, causing some type of social damage by doing this. And yeah, let me clarify. There are some situations where I think this works really, really well, and others where I think you would have to be very careful. And let me explain what I think those are. So obviously, when you need to evaluate someone's emotional stability in a relationship, that matters. And how I define that is a relationship that you may have over a long period of time, such as a friendship, a romantic partnership, a new coworker, a business partnership, whatever it is, something that's going to exist in your life over time, or some relationship that's going to require a lot of your attention and energy. Obviously, in situations like that, you need to have a good gauge of someone's emotional stability in those situations. So if there's a guy outside the supermarket asking for spare change and you go, no, you're not walking away from that situation with some profound enlightenment or feeling of empowerment over your boundaries or whatever it is. You're probably just a dick, right? So this is ultimately for relationships and situations that matter in your life. Yeah, so like when forming new friendships or relationships of any kind, I often find it helpful to look for an opportunity, and don't necessarily create one, but look for an opportunity where you may need to politely decline saying, doing someone a favor or providing information. Maybe somebody asks you a question, and maybe you could answer. Maybe you could, maybe they're asking how old you are, or they're asking, I don't know, how much money you make, or they're asking whatever it is. And maybe to you, it doesn't really matter. You could tell them. Use that as an opportunity to go, no, I'm actually going to not tell you that, or I'm not going to do that. And just see how that person responds. Another situation where it could be very, very useful to do this is if it's important to avoid being manipulated. For instance, if someone's trying to sell you something or pitch you to do something, sometimes salespeople will use these types of tactics where if you say no, they may guilt trip you, or they may try to shame you, like subtly. They may try to make you feel embarrassed or isolated or something. Well, everybody else is doing this, and I guess if you don't want to be part of that crew, then hey, like these are manipulative tactics that people use and you want to avoid. Like companies will often try to take advantage of like smaller suppliers, like a freelancer or somebody like that, by kind of dangling the, well, we have other suppliers who we could go to, stick this kind of fear that, well, if you don't want to lower your price, then we'll just go to somebody else or something like that. Once I see that a potential client or customer or somebody says that, it tells me a lot about what the relationship with them is likely going to be. That this is somebody who's probably going to very often dangle that same stick over my head when they're trying to get me to do something that is more to their benefit than to mine. I find it's very helpful to make a determination early in a potential relationship or situation whether or not this is something that you want to deal with, because that can be really, really stressful and drain your physical resources. Sometimes you end up in a situation where someone is manipulating you, and they're manipulating your money as well. It could literally make you more broke by being afraid to tell somebody no. There's a couple other situations as well where I think you would have to be careful with using this. For instance, in like a high stakes team situation or if you work in something like emergency response, there are some legitimate situations and personal situations, I think, where you do have to, at least for a time, and those situations are usually short-term situations, like I said, in an emergency response or some type of high stakes thing. That might not be a situation where you want to put down your foot and just go no, because maybe there's a greater good that you're trying to achieve. But again, that is your individual judgment. generally speaking. If you're involved in some high stakes situation like that, most likely you have predetermined that your participation in this serves a higher and greater good. So, of course, that would be an exception. Another exception, I think, would be in circumstances where it's actually worth it to overextend. And here's what I mean. I have found that there are people who are highly sensitive and do not handle rejection well. So, similar to the people who are manipulative or who respond in anger or punishment or whatever, they are also not emotionally regulated and don't handle being told no well, but it's for a different reason. It's not necessarily that they are being manipulative. It's because their own personal sensitivity causes them to judge themselves or become very anxious about something or whatever it is. And of course, in each individual circumstance, you want to make a determination about how much that has to do with you. For instance, I work in the creative sector, and you have a lot of people who are highly sensitive, but who are geniuses. Absolutely. I mean, their work is phenomenal. And for the value of that person's work, you may determine that their sensitivity is tolerable. You may want to be a bit more careful about how you give that person feedback, for instance. And of course, again, in everything, just like with that Stanford study, you want to find a balance. That was the ultimate outcome of that study, that you should seek to find the right balance of engagement and indulgence for that person's particular temperament. So you obviously want to, in every circumstance, you have a boundary as to what you will tolerate. Like, for instance, I imagine working with certain musicians. You may be a producer, and there's a certain musician that might be particularly sensitive about something, about how they work or about whatever. And maybe it's a little bit quirky, a little bit odd or whatever, but the overall value of working with that person may just be worth tolerating a little bit of eccentricity. However, even in those circumstances, because I'm aware that I am making a conscious decision to tolerate a certain amount of sensitivity from someone, I'm also mindful that there should come a point where I go, okay, hey, I think this person can handle this one. And I think that even if the person may be disappointed or maybe upset or something like that, I may have by then been able to gauge enough as to whether or not the person is able to handle that. Another exception might be cultural context. So, for instance, I live in a culture where people tend to be a bit more sensitive to being told no. So we do expect a bit more politeness and sort of beating around the bush a little bit, frankly speaking. So that's something that I take into consideration, that maybe culturally speaking, simply saying no may be socially damaging. So in that case, I'll find a way to say no that is still socially appropriate. Those are probably some of the exceptions and the situations where one would have to be a bit more careful with saying no. But generally speaking, I've found that in most circumstances when forming a new relationship, rather than doing the typical thing of overly engaging or overly indulging someone for the purposes of endearment, it's more important, at least for me, that I begin to judge whether or not that person is emotionally regulated. And by simply saying no, reasonably and politely and with the appropriate sensitivity, it gives me enough information to make a reasonable judgment about that person's emotional stability. Ultimately, I think that this approach is something that is quite valuable when used in moderation, and when you take into consideration things like cultural context, someone's personality type, and the value of that relationship to you. A nice no in the early stages of building that relationship can do wonders. And if you do try this yourself, let me know how it works, but be careful.